Peppa, it's time to work.
Daddy Pig sat at an old typewriter. The lamp flickered. He typed with a tense expression. The letters on the paper began to melt. Words gave birth to shadows, and shadows to words no one had written. Suddenly, a black tangle of tentacles with red eyes burst out from between the keys. Daddy Pig flinched, but his face remained emotionless. A tentacle coiled around his wrist. He seemed not to feel it and kept typing. Ink dripped from the paper. Daddy suddenly slammed his fist on the desk. His eyes turned black for a split second. Peppa opened the door just a crack. Daddy said sharply in a voice that wasn't his own, "Get out! Don't interrupt!" She ran. Peppa trembled by the wall. From under the office door, shadowy tentacles began to creep out. She tiptoed back and peered through the keyhole. Daddy was motionless, his body wrapped in a black mass from which dozens of burning red eyes protruded. He suddenly twisted his head 180 degrees. Black eyes, a horrifying smile. Peppa recoiled and fell back. The study door creaked open by itself. From the darkness stepped Daddy's shadow, stretched tentacles instead of arms, his silhouette twitching, black liquid dripping. Daddy's scorched voice whispered,
Peppa, it's time to work.
The typewriter began typing on its own. The clicking grew faster. Peppa pressed herself to the wall at the end of the hallway. She slid slowly downward, trembling. The light flickered. In the doorway, Daddy's silhouette, his outline shifting as if made of tentacles. He moved with jittery, jerking motions. Tentacles reached for Peppa. Suddenly, darkness. A typical evening, tea, girlfriends. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. The light bulbs suddenly began to flicker. The girls fell silent and looked up. The first alarm. The house had awakened. Susie began to tremble. The hum grew louder. The shadows became restless. The shadow beneath Susie's chair pulsed and darkened. Susie screamed, dropping her doll. Peppa grabbed Susie's hand. The shadow reached for Susie's leg. The kitchen turned into a trap. The girls ran into the living room. The room was quiet. The silence was deceptive. The couch's shadow melted onto the floor, turning into a flat black puddle. It slowly spread across the floor. From its center rose something, like a shapeless ink-blot tentacle. Susie stared in horror. Peppa recoiled. The puddle slid toward them, stretching. Peppa shoved Susie toward the hallway door, but escape was a lie. Darkness awaited them there, too. A mass of wallpaper was already partly oozing down under the stairs. An eye on a tentacle stared at them. The Shadow Eater had seeped out of the living room. Peppa and Susie ran toward the staircase. The Eater tried to cut them off, sliding along the wall. Susie nearly fell. The pounding of footsteps, heavy breathing, the rising sounds of monsters. Peppa pulled Susie into the nursery and slammed the door. Black liquid seeped from underneath. A message appeared on the wall. "We are in the walls." George was there too. Black film covered his mouth. His black eyes shot open. The darkness had already consumed him. George's shadow tore away from the wall, forming a new Eater. Susie screamed in terror. Peppa spotted a flashlight on the dresser. Bright light! In the flashlight beam, the Shadow Eater recoiled, writhing as it slithered under the door. The wallpaper, a giant mass with eyes, was stuck to the outside window. The flashlight flickered wildly and died. A wet, slurping sound echoed in the dark. Suddenly, Peppa's face with black eyes. "Your house has consumed the light." Peppa and George decided to take a walk in the forest and stumbled upon an old, abandoned house. It looked very gloomy. Broken windows, overgrown bushes, creaky door. Inside, it was dark and cold. Cracked portraits hung on the walls. Their eyes seemed alive. Suddenly, it became dark outside the window. At that moment, a strange woman appeared. The owner of the house. Her face was pale, and her eyes were cold and frightening. She smiled strangely and said,
Welcome. You shouldn't have come here.
Suddenly, she began to change. Her face distorted. Her eyes shone with bright red light, and something black flowed out of them. Peppa tried to run, but the door slammed shut by itself. The demon owner grabbed Peppa and George with her long claws. Their screams disappeared into the darkness. Everything around started to distort. The house's owner dragged the children into her dark basement. Peppa and George were tied up. Their mouths were covered with rags. The owner was boiling something murky in a huge cauldron and muttered,
Soon I will enjoy this.
Peppa turned around and saw Susie and Rebecca. They were also tied up and trembling with fear. Suddenly, a familiar, sinister whisper sounded. The door opened. Standing in the doorway was Eevee, with tentacles and a sinister smile. She grabbed the house owner with one of her tentacles and swallowed her with a sinister sound. Afterward, Eevee smiled sweetly but continued to radiate horror. The children were scared. They already knew what awaited them. Eevee wasn't full yet and was planning to fix that. Peppa and Mom were choosing products from the shelves. Soon they noticed a figure in a dark cloak. Sometimes ordinariness concealed something else. The faceless shopper suddenly turned his head. Smooth gray skin was covered with cracks from which black liquid dripped and red dots flickered. Peppa nudged Mom.
Look,
Instead of the frightening figure, an ordinary shopper smiled and took a can of beans. Peppa approached the exit and looked outside. The cloak of the faceless one flashed in the doorway as he walked away down the street. He had already gone outside. Peppa stepped out onto the square. Among the passers-by, suddenly several faceless ones froze motionless. Gray faces with cracks and red dots flickered in the crowd. The crowd concealed their faces, but they harbored a great secret. One faceless one slowly raised his tentacle-like hand and pointed at Peppa. For a moment, all the passers-by distorted their faces, their skin pale. Cracks filled with black liquid and red dots flared up. Terrified, Peppa spun around and ran into a narrow alleyway. Peppa ran through the tight alley, panicking as she looked back. Black liquid was dripping down the walls, sticking to her little shoes. The streetlights flickered, but there wasn't enough light. Peppa froze at the door. For a moment, everything was completely silent. Only her rapid breathing could be heard. At that very moment, a faceless one leapt out of a puddle. His mouth opened in an inhuman grimace, and tentacles lunged into attack.
White is cleaner. It reveals the truth.
Today at school, a new room was announced. Her creator had something in mind. Danny was the first to enter. After some time, he came out. His face was blurred like a washed-out watercolor drawing. Black paint dripped from the holes where his eyes and mouth should have been.
It's very fun.
He said mechanically. Suddenly, a line formed. After a few days, the children's mouths disappeared. Their clothes faded to dusty gray. The children were losing their faces. Peppa was flipping through a notebook. Black, distorted faces flickered on the pages as if screaming. Suddenly, tentacles burst out of the paper and grabbed her by the arm. A burn remained on her skin. The room left traces. No one erased them. Peppa tried to preserve the colors, but the room kept erasing everything. The next day, all the students turned to Peppa in unison, with wide, identical smiles, and said in chorus,
White is cleaner. It reveals the truth.
Now, it's her turn. Ahead is light that blinds thoughts. There's no way back. From the walls slowly emerged white silhouettes with distorted features, and black handprints appeared on the surfaces. They watched. They waited. Night fell. Peppa stood in the center of the white room. With trembling hands, Peppa wrote, Yellow light, laughter, I. She tried to remember, but words no longer meant anything. She was the last. Silence remained, and Peppa, who no longer remembered anything. George was standing by an open, empty toy box, crying.
my dinosaur is gone.
When the main thing is lost, the scary awakens. Peppa entered the room, hugged her brother, and looked around. Peppa's gaze was drawn to something on George's bed, an old plush teddy bear covered in black liquid. She found not what she was looking for. The buttons on the bear were slightly trembling and turning toward Peppa. Black liquid slowly seeped from a seam under its ear. Suddenly, the bear threw out a paw tentacle and grabbed Peppa's hand. Peppa screamed and threw the bear away. It twitched on the floor, then ran off into the corridor. Peppa grabbed George's hand and ran after him. The chase had begun. Peppa and George wandered in the semi-darkness. On the walls, black paw prints. At the dark end of the corridor, a silhouette of a bear flickered. It disappeared behind the attic door. Where light did not reach, dwelled the keeper. Peppa took a flashlight from the wall. They slowly climbed up the creaky stairs. Along the edges, webs of black tentacles like veins of living darkness. The center of the hall was covered in cobwebs. In it sat the bear keeper, grown to Peppa's size. Around, old toys, dolls with empty eye sockets, cars with red headlights frozen in anticipation. All forgotten toys began to move slowly, their heads and headlights turned toward Peppa and George. The bear keeper hissed in a low voice.
Lost toys. Your fault.
His mouth with needle-sharp teeth opened wide, black liquid pouring out. Tentacles from the bear lunged at Peppa. She dodged, throwing aside the box, and out rolled Dinosaur. George shouted and ran to him. Peppa turned on her flashlight at full brightness. Its beam blinded the keeper. He squealed. His tentacles recoiled. He ran into a crack in the floor. Peppa and George descended the stairs. They ran into their bedroom and slammed the door shut. It was quiet in the room. On Peppa's bed stood the bear keeper, but he was motionless. Next to him lay George's dinosaur with a grin of needle-sharp teeth. They will come for you if you forget about them again.
They stepped out into the rain. But this rain was different. The world around them was empty. A street lamp hummed faintly. Each drop carried darkness within it. A black puddle, like ink, spilled into reality. George leaned over the puddle. Emily grabbed his shoulder, stopping him.
Step back.
It seemed the puddle was fading. A false alarm, but in its reflection atop the raindrops, a black, hooded figure appeared. The group approached a bench. The rain intensified. The longer they stayed in the rain, the deeper the infection spread. A drop landed on Susie. Her hand turned blurry, translucent. Emily screamed, pulling it away. They vanished. Peppa noticed bubbles rising in the old well. Eevee began to cry softly. Black liquid dripped from the corner of her mouth. She reached toward the well. Even the little one understood. Something was hiding there. From the puddles lining the path, tendrils slithered out, surrounding Susie and Emily. The darkness didn't just take, it held on. Peppa ran, shielding Eevee with an umbrella. Emily broke free, but stumbled. Tendril grabbed her. Her scream echoed everywhere. In the glow of the street lamp stood the Dripper, massive, black droplets trailing down his cloak. He was the soul of this rain. He whispered. Peppa, holding Eevee in her arms, approached him, the umbrella raised like a shield. The final question, is it worth fighting, escape, or become the rain? Eevee smiled.
A normal day, Peppa and George are playing with dolls. One of them was strange. Its head was slightly tilted to the side. Peppa carefully turned the broken doll. A thin crack appeared on the face of the porcelain doll. Sometimes a small crack is just a premonition of something terrible. The light in the room flickered for a second. At that moment, Eevee in the crib flinched and fell silent. She was no longer breathing evenly. Black liquid was dripping from the crack in the doll. Peppa ran to the crib, but it was empty. The outlines of tiny fingers had disappeared, replaced by cold fingerprints. A trail of black liquid stretched from the crib to the dollhouse. Horrified, Peppa took George's hand and led him there. In the central room sat the puppeteer, a figure with a porcelain face, but with cracks running all over its body. In its hands was Eevee, like a doll, her eyes closed, unmoving. The puppeteer lifted its head and slowly opened its eyes. They glowed red. It stroked Eevee's cheek and said,
My new doll.
Peppa and George froze as if held by an invisible force. The dollhouse continues to play, even if the players are silent. Doll Eevee spoke in a creepy voice.
You are next.
Peppa, George, and little Eevee snuggled comfortably in bed. A bedtime story, the perfect end to the day. Peppa's gaze drifted toward the bedroom door behind which something was awakening,
I'll check the kitchen. Quickly, go to sleep.
said Mommy Pig, but she never returned.
Mom!
George and Eevee looked anxiously into the semi-darkness of the corridor. The call of darkness came from there. Peppa took Eevee's hand and they stepped forward into the unknown. Dark streams flowed down the walls. Each step could be their last.
Mom, where are you?
And the darkness answered. Suddenly, a splash. Ink began to rise upward. From the droplets, a silhouette appeared, almost reaching the ceiling. A thin body, tentacle-like arms covered with cracks. Two blazing red orbs for eyes. A mouth twisted into a crooked, predatory grin. Black liquid dripping from its fangs. It knows where you are and is waiting for its moment. The monster's tentacles suddenly swept at George and Eevee. Peppa screamed in horror, reaching out for them, but her hands passed through the black mass. It doesn't eat, it transforms. George and Eevee disappeared into the ink-like mass, and after a second, they reappeared, but already changed. Their eyes were completely black, their smiles unnaturally wide, their skin gray. Now they are his servants.
Play with us, Peppa.
Suddenly, from the depths of the corridor, Mommy and Daddy emerged, distorted, their faces smeared, eyes black, with traces of black liquid in the corners of their mouths. Even loved ones have become strangers, and now she is alone. Eevee was drawing. Peppa was sitting nearby. "You're drawing very beautifully," said Peppa. "I tried to be just like you," replied Eevee. The picture featured Peppa, but her smile was not her own. The next morning, Peppa woke up. George was looking in the mirror. "What's wrong with you?" asked Peppa. "There's someone else there," George answered emptily. In the evening, Peppa looked into the mirror, but behind her, someone else was standing. It was Eevee, but she was taller and scarier. That night, Peppa woke up from a strange rustling in the room. George was no longer there. She quietly approached the mirror and saw a figure emerging from its depths. Distorted, it was Eevee. Her legs, arms, and neck were very long. "Did you think you could stop me?" she hissed. Peppa tried to run, but suddenly several hands stretched out from the mirror and grabbed her. At that moment, her parents woke up. They heard the noise and rushed into the nursery. When they entered, they saw hands almost completely pulling Peppa into the mirror. Suddenly, she found herself inside a mirror world where only darkness reigned. Mama Pig and Papa Pig tried to help, but Eevee caught them too. Moments later, the parents were lying on the floor, very pale and thin.
Welcome to my world. Now you are just reflections. I will replace you all.